everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Ashram Talks. My name is Ambika. I'm joining you here from Toronto, Canada, and I'm very excited to have our esteemed guest, Simon Haas, returning with us as well. Simon, it's the first time joining us, Simon is an international author, speaker, and teacher of yoga philosophy. So Simon is joining us for a very exciting topic today. Three sacred teachings teachings for when your world falls apart. Very, very interesting topic name, and excited to be diving in.
Thank you so much, Ambika. I'm so excited to be here, and I've been actually waiting eagerly for this particular episode. So first, I want to welcome those of you who are watching this live, and for those of you who will be watching the recording, welcome as well. It's great to connect with you. Today, we will be looking at the Bhagavad Gita, verses 39 to 43 of chapter 1. So we're gradually in this kind of small, intimate study group. We're making our way through the Bhagavad Gita, and we're on verses 39 to 43. So before beginning, I would like to recite a Mangala Charanam. That's an auspicious invocation. It's a tradition in India. It's a way of creating or opening a sacred space. He Shri Guru Jnanadadina Bandho Svananda Data Karunaika Sindho Brindavanasi Nahitavatara Prasidha Radha Pranaya Prachara. Thank you very much. I have promised you to share with you the meaning of this particular Sanskrit verse, which is a prayer to the teacher. We will do that another time, simply because we have quite a bit to cover for this particular episode. So the first chapter of the Gita, which is where we're at the moment still, is about facing crisis. So in Sanskrit, that's vishad, which literally means despair. So it's the kind of crisis that plunges us in utter darkness, that tears our small human story apart and leaves us really in utter grief and despair. And in this kind of experience, we're not able to see any light at the end of the proverbial tunnel, that we don't see any way out. So the Bhagavad Gita begins with Arjuna's despair. And navigating such an experience in the best way is known as Vishad Yoga, or the yoga of crisis. So previously we took a look at the triggers of Arjuna's crisis. We also looked at 4 signs of a dark night of the soul. And in this episode, we'll be looking at 2 themes. One is family and tradition, and this relates to the particular verses that we're looking at today, and 3 teachings for navigating crisis. So we turn first to Bhagavad Gita, verse 39. Kulakshaye pranashyanti kula dharmaha sanatanaha dharme nashte kulam kritsnam adharmo bibhavatyuta. So with the destruction of dynasty, this is Arjuna speaking, the warrior Arjuna. And he's speaking to Krishna, his dear friend and charioteer. And he says, with the destruction of dynasty, the eternal family tradition is vanquished. And thus the rest of the family becomes involved in irreligious practice. So the Sanskrit word is adharma. So it means that which is opposed to dharma. So here, if I paraphrase this in a different way, Arjuna is saying with the destruction of the family, eternal or ancient family duties perish. And when dharma is lost, the entire family becomes overpowered by adharma. So you'll see in this verse, kula. Kula means family or lineage. And Arjuna's here, he's worried that this battle at Kurukshetra, in which so many warriors will perish, it'll lead to the destruction of family lineage. And then Kula Dharma, the duties or traditions of the family, which are Sanatana. Sanatana means eternal, it also means ancient. So the ancient traditions will become lost. So Arjuna is giving various reasons why he would like to leave Kurukshetra, the battlefield, and avoid the situation that he's in. So he begins by reflecting on the impending battle in relation to his dharma. In other words, in relation to his duty or calling as a warrior. So you have to remember the word dharma in Sanskrit has several different meanings. One meaning is when our thoughts, words, and actions are of such quality that the universe sustains us in our efforts. Another meaning of dharma is one's calling or one's purpose in life. Another meaning of dharma is a tradition or duty. So the tradition, kula dharmaha, means the traditions of the family or lineage. So the Arjuna and his brothers, the Pandavas, are kshatriyas, they're warriors. And so waging a battle is not in conflict with their duty or calling. And of course, in this particular case, the Arjuna tried everything to avoid this battle at Kurukshetra. And but due to the persecution by the blind emperor Dhritarashtra and his son Duryodhana, they faced so many difficulties for decades in their life, even exile in the forest for 13 years and humiliation, so many troubles they had to undergo for many decades. And then this has led to this battlefield of Kurukshetra, this battle of Kurukshetra. Arjuna and Krishna are in the middle of the two armies, and Arjuna is speaking to Krishna and saying that he sees his relatives on both sides of this battlefield and is thinking that it might be better just to leave the battlefield and not participate in this impending war. So Arjuna argues that a war of this type will lead to the destruction of family and lineage, which in turn will lead to the collapse of community wisdom, community traditions, which are passed down over generations. So in 5 verses, Arjuna is speaking about protecting family values and ancient customs and traditions. So interestingly, this is something that we've in many ways largely lost in contemporary Western culture, which valorizes individualism and rejecting or breaking with the past. We tend to valorize that. So as a culture, if anything, we worship youth and tend to sideline or devalue elders. And when this happens generation after generation, we're no longer learning from each other's experience of life. And so we may no longer have many true elders or spiritual guides. So this is the Arjuna's focus at this point as he's speaking to Krishna. I'm actually reminded here of the teachings of Prahlad in the Bhagavata Purana, where he explains that everything mostly what we try to find fulfillment in so many different ways. So we look for ourselves in the world. So we look for our identity in the field of perception. So the field of perception, the field of now is it's symbolized by Kurukshetra, as we've discussed previously. So in other words, we're looking for our identity in the field and our fulfillment in events that take place on that field of action. But everything we try to do, whether it's accumulation of wealth, or we may try to gain prestige through recognition, academic recognition, status, The various ways that we try to um, the various ways in which we create a narrative or story, small human story, by seeking our identity in the world. Everything has been tried previously by previous generations. There's nothing that we can try actually in that respect that hasn't been tried before by our grandparents and great grandparents. So the young boy Prahlad, he says that that's like chewing the chewed. In India, you sometimes see there are many um, dogs who live in the street, and if you've visited India, you might have seen this because it's quite a common sight. You might see one dog finds a bone, and it's just a dried old bone. It doesn't have, it's been out in the blazing sun for months, and this dog grabs it. And as soon as it catches hold of it, all the other dogs notice that that dog has found something, so they chase after it, and they're like attacking this dog and biting it, and the dog is moving in this direction and that to try and avoid being hurt, and eventually it releases that bone, and another dog grabs it, and all the dogs chase that dog. So life can sometimes be very much like that on the battlefield, the field of action, where we end up chasing things, thinking that they will find some real meaning and fulfillment in that, and it's actually when we realize, when we let go of that and realize that our identity exists beyond the field of perception, beyond the outside. Whatever we see in the field of perception is not who we truly are. You'll see that that's the first teaching that Krishna gives in chapter 2 of the Gita when he begins speaking and he responds to Arjuna. So that'll come in a few episodes from now. But these are teachings about, or this is true knowledge of the nature of this world. And it's something that's very valuable. And it can be passed down from elders. And importantly, also what elders pass down is knowledge of Vishad Yoga, the yoga of crisis, how to overcome great difficulty, existential crises that we may face. So it's that wisdom that traditionally is passed from one generation to the next, and that in many respects in many ways we've largely lost in our contemporary culture. So we turn now to 3 teachings that we will find in these verses of the Gita in chapter 1. 3 teachings for when our world falls apart. So the first teaching that we find in the Gita relating to Vishad, or despair, the dark night of what I'm referring to as the dark night of the soul, is that the first teaching is to honor crisis as a rite of passage. So we've spoken about this previously. We tend in the West to try to hide or resist or avoid a dark night of the soul. There's a stigma attached to crisis. And in other cultures, they don't see existential crisis in that way. Rather, they regard it as a sacred rite of passage. So the Bhagavad Gita accords it, gives it the status of a type of yoga, Vishada Yoga, the yoga of despair. Now, why is that important? Because when we treat crisis in that way, then we're able to set off on the journey of the soul, because we can understand that it's a natural part of life and it's a journey worth taking. So in nature, we see that there is metamorphosis. For example, the caterpillar becoming a butterfly. And as humans, we don't go through a physical metamorphosis, but we go through a spiritual one, or we may go through several of these crisis experiences, each time coming out renewed and transformed. Nature has so much to teach us. It doesn't fight its own, nature doesn't fight its own natural processes. So an acorn, a river, an embryo, a caterpillar, they all follow their internal blueprints. But as humans, we tend to continuously fight our own natural processes. So the first teaching is honor the dark night of the soul as a rite of passage. In other words, allow it to happen. And that brings us to the second teaching. And we see this in the way that Arjuna responds. So the second teaching is let go of the need to control. So in a dark night of the soul, our small human story, our narrative is torn apart. And that's what casts us, that's what unmoors us. And we find ourselves without purpose, unsure about meaning. And we experience, so the four signs of a dark night of the soul, if you remember, the first one is suffering associated with time. So fear, lamentation, and confusion. Those three types of suffering associated with the future, the past, and the present become extremely intense. So much so that we don't know whether we can tolerate, whether we'll be able to bear it. So in a dark night experience, in an existential crisis, we try to hold on to the fragments of our story. We want things to be the way they were before. So we see that with Arjuna. He, in the coming verses now, he will express his fear, his lamentation, and his confusion. He wants things to be the way they were before, so much so that he's tells Krishna, maybe now is the time to just exit the field of action. Kurukshetra, the field of now, the field of action. So when this happens, and we want things to be the way they were before, the mind is very, very active. And it comes up with so many arguments. There's a continuous flow of thoughts and attachments and fears. So we see that also with the blind emperor Dhritarashtra at the beginning of the Bhagavad Gita. He's also in a dark night of the soul. And he's expressing his fear, attachment, and illusory ego. So this is what we see at this point with Arjuna in 5 verses and beyond. He's giving so many different reasons to leave Kurukshetra, the field of action. So Arjuna's fundamental response is an emotional one. And then he constructs a line of rational argument to justify his emotional impulse. And Krishna confirms that view in his initial response to Arjuna, as we'll see at the beginning of chapter 2. So in chapter 1, Arjuna is doing most of the talking. If you look at the Gita, Arjuna is doing most of the talking in chapter 1. But once you reach verse 7 of chapter 2, Karpanya dosho pahata svabhava prichami tvam dharma samudhachetaha. In this particular passage, Arjuna realizes that there's nothing, his thoughts cannot help him out of his crisis. His arguments are not able to help him. So he turns to Krishna and he says, now I am your student. I don't know what's right anymore, what to do and what not to do. Please become my teacher of yoga. And then Krishna begins to speak. And you'll see that from that point onwards, Arjuna becomes, he's listening a lot more. And he's still very much engaged. So he asks Krishna various questions. There's certain teachings that Krishna gives he doesn't quite fully understand. So he asks Krishna to elaborate. He's engaged, but he's also open to listening. So this second teaching of a dark night of the soul, letting go of the need to control, it's an opportunity for us to withdraw our attention from the outer world and allow things to be and let go of the need to control. It's a time to become more silent and open and a time to really listen. So That then takes us to the third teaching, which is to trust your inner guide. Like Arjuna, in a way, we're driving our chariot on the field of life. The chariot is our physical body. The five horses are our senses. This is an analogy that you find in the Katha Upanishad. And the Gita is full of passages that are Upanishadic, that are drawn from the Upanishads, especially the beginning of the Gita. So we're the warrior or hero in the imagined story of our life. And currently the mind or illusory ego is our charioteer. But Krishna, the universal teacher, seated in our heart, is there also. And Arjuna, at this point, to cross this very difficult experience of existential crisis, he turns to Krishna, the universal teacher, and takes shelter of him. So the topic of the teacher is very important in the ancient texts of India. There's a lot to say on that, and perhaps not so much time to say it, but the universal teacher manifests in our life in three ways. The first is the voice of truth in our heart, so the inner guide. We recognize truth when it speaks to us, because just as we know we're awake when we're awake, but often the mind speaks so loudly that we may not be able to hear that inner voice. And so the universal teacher also manifests in our external world as the various teachers and mentors in our life. They're all manifestations of the universal teacher. And that can be anything from, our first teachers might be our parents, close friends who will speak truthfully but kindly to us. Maybe a teacher we've had in school or elsewhere who has set us out, helped us begin our journey, spiritual journey, or helped us find our purpose or calling. And then, of course, there are teachers of different levels. So we may also have had, or we may have the opportunity to study from a teacher of immense wisdom. So that's the second manifestation of the universal teacher. And the third manifestation of the universal teacher in our life is our environment. Everything around us has something valuable to teach us if we're able to look and see and find that wisdom. So even the dark night of the soul, well, perhaps particularly the dark night of the soul, has many jewels hidden in it if we're able to search and find them. What we may think is a problem, a challenge, or a difficulty in our life also contains a valuable jewel within its center. So in that way, our environment is also our teacher. So in a dark night of the soul, to summarize, the first teaching is to honor a dark night as a rite of passage. So like that will reduce the impulse to try and hide, to try and conceal it, resist it, or avoid it. Let go of the need to control, the impulse to try and restore the things the way that they were before. Because the more we try to do that, the more it increases fear, lamentation, and confusion, the three types of suffering that we experience in a dark night of the soul in particular. And then the third teaching is to use the opportunity of an existential crisis or a dark night to turn inward rather than focusing always on the field of perception, on the outward problems and challenges, to turn inward and develop this ability to listen to wisdom all around us, including wisdom that springs from within our own very heart. So I want to finish with an exercise that you can do. We won't do it together here, but I'll try to explain it and invite you to try this if you wish. The practice of saying yes to life, of allowing what is to be is represented in yoga by shavasana, or the corpse pose. So some of you may be familiar with the corpse pose. It's a yoga pose that normally comes at the end of a yoga session. And in this pose, the yoga practitioner lies on her back with arms at her sides in a state of complete acceptance. So the corpse pose, when you see it, it may look easy, but it's actually quite difficult because its full benefits come with finding complete release. If shavasana, if the corpse pose could speak, what would it say? What would be its teachings? It might say, let go of projections and resistance. Let go of your stories and identities in this world. Be your own best friend. Above all, never forget you are a child of the universe as much as the stars and the trees. You deserve to be here. You are protected and supported. So if you happen to be going through a dark night of the soul, and one reason that we looked at the various symptoms of a dark night of the soul is to understand if this is something we've been through in the past, or to know whether this is something we're going through at the moment. So if you are going through a dark night of the soul, I invite you to try Shavasana pose, the corpse pose. This works extremely well, even in relation to if you're feeling weighed down by everyday life. There are challenges, there are difficulties that you're facing in life, and they're accumulating, and you're struggling with that. Then Shavasana can be a huge help in just taking that burden of fear, lamentation, and confusion and setting it aside, even if it's just for a short time. Finally, turning back to Dhritarashtra, he is going through what's known as an underlying dark night of the soul. So there are two types of dark nights of the soul. There is a particular existential crisis we might go through at some stage in our life, or we may go through several of those. But all of these emerge from an underlying dark night of the soul that in the sacred texts of India is known as avidya, or darkness, absence of knowledge, absence of awareness, really. So like Dhritarashtra, we are all kings and queens. And like Dhritarashtra, we've all created our own battlefield. We've turned the sacred field of life, the sacred field of the present moment, into an arena of competition and struggle. Rather than a field of love and affection, a field of giving and serving, it becomes an arena for taking and for grasping. So the Bhagavad Gita, starting with Vishad Yoga, the yoga of crisis, shows us how to transform our approach to life, so that rather than seeking to take and to grasp, we approach life from a different paradigm, a paradigm of love and affection, a paradigm of giving and service. So that, in a way, sums up the Vishad Yoga, the first system of yoga in the Bhagavad Gita, which can act as the start of our journey of the soul. We use the word spiritual or spirituality. The word in Sanskrit, closest word you can find in Sanskrit is Atma Gati, or the journey of the soul, the journey of the self. And the dark night of the soul can be a gateway that starts us off. Or if we're already on this journey, it deepens our practice, and it takes us far on this Atmagati, the journey of the self. We'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. And so many lovely reflections that were coming to me from this class. But one of them in particular is just that tendency, especially in the West, to want to maybe hide the negative things that we're going through. You scroll through social media or Instagram or whatever, and it's the best moments. It's the happiness, the joy,
Right.
the wonderful things. And maybe we need some more Instagram accounts of dark nights of the soul. Just sharing a little bit more of
Ambika, I love what you've just said, because the social media acts as a tool to deepen or to become more invested in the false narratives and stories that we live out. So it actually ends up leading to intensified suffering as a
mm,
result in
mm,
various ways. It might not even be apparent immediately, and but whenever we look for our identity in the small human story that we're projecting, then it inevitably leads to these three types of suffering. So
mm,
social media becomes a tool for that. It becomes a tool that it can become a tool. It can be a tool that can be very helpful, and it can be a tool that takes us deeper into avidya, or
mm,
the underlying dark night of the soul. So
mm.
I love that observation.
Yeah, the chewing of the chewed, as you mentioned before, it's just that's social media can sometimes feel like that. A lot of rechewing and chewing some more. But thank you so much for this wonderful class, and thank you everybody for joining us for another episode of Ashram Talks. We will be back on Thursday at 8 a.m. Eastern time. If you found value and you felt inspired by this class, feel free to give this video a like, share with someone who might need to hear some of these words of support and accompaniment if they're going through a hard time as well. If you would like to hear more of these types of classes, you can, of course, subscribe to our channel and get those notifications to you directly as well. So thank you once again, Simon. Thank you to all of you for joining us, and we'll see you on the next episode of Ashram Talks.